We're back with another edition of the preview show, and this week we are focusing on UFC 290, an absolutely monster card this Saturday night. I'm here as always with Harry Powell, and a very special guest today. Seànie Sheen is joining us right below on the bottom, and we're going to break down the card. How's the boys today? Are we looking forward to this card?
I'm hardly a guest of mine now. Jesus.
No, you're not. We're a special guest. I wanted to make you feel special, Sean.
I'll take it.
Yeah. Lads, UFC 290. I guess how I want to start off this, right? Look, there's three of us now. We can keep it as conversational as possible. Jump in and out whenever you want to as well. Last week we were giving out about, main event slots, who was in main event slots, but we can't complain this week. Probably two of the nicest guys and well-respected champions that you're going to get in the game right now are on show on Saturday night. Alexander Volkanovski will defend his featherweight title against Yair Rodriguez in the main event. Brandon Moreno takes on Alexandre Pantoja for the second time, or Alexandre Pantoja versus Brandon Moreno 2.5 if you want to count their Ultimate Fighter fight, which happened a little while ago as well. Elsewhere on the card, Robert Whittaker comes in against Dricus du Plessis. Dan Hooker takes on Jalin Turner. Bo Nickel comes in and takes on Valentin Woodburn. We see the retirement fight of Robbie Lawler, Jack Della Maddalena, and lots more on the undercard as well. We're going to break it down for you guys over the next course of the hour or so, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Let's talk the main event, lads. I want to talk Alexander Volkanovski. I feel that we're kind of in the pinnacle of his career right now. You know, everybody's been talking him up, and we have been for quite some time on the preview show and everything else. He really is a special fighter, and I feel, we should be hugging him and cherishing him and enjoying this moment as much as we can, because he's not going to be around forever. Such a good fighter. Obviously, that's very important. But like I said, such a great personality outside the cage. Staying active, moving up in weight, taking on challenges, utmost respect. One of my favorite fighters to watch right now. And he's so technically brilliant. I'm really excited to see what kind of a game plan, what kind of a structure he brings into place on Saturday night against Yair Rodriguez, who himself has had somewhat of a career resurgence, winning that interim title against Josh Emmett not so long ago. He comes in here with the daunting task of being the first man to defeat Alexander Volkanovski at 145 pounds. And it really is, Harry, a mouth-watering contest. We won't go into the nitty-gritty of the fight just yet, but maybe your overall thoughts on this main event and some of your main talking points maybe coming into this fight.
I think for me, this is Alexander Volkanovski coming back and cementing greatness. That's his storyline here, right? His storyline is he took the leap of faith. He went up and challenged the guy in Islam Makhachev, an extremely close fight, a fight that, as we have spoken about ad nauseum at this point, a fight that I think will live long in the history of modern MMA. But now I think he's coming back, almost coming home, if you will, to just cement the legacy. And that's something that, for me personally, I feel like, okay, Yair Rodriguez may not be a legacy fight as we would necessarily call them in other divisions, but what we noticed and have had in the modern era more often than not is you'll see a guy go and challenge upper division and then they don't come back down. They don't bother staying. They're like, oh, well, now I'm just going to do super fights and I'm going to fight Jake Paul and I'm going to fight this cunt and that cunt and the next thing. Israel Adesanya has done the same thing by going up, losing to Jan Blachowicz, coming back down, but he's already talking about going back up. Volkanovski is talking about, I want to go up. I missed grand. I felt I won the fight, or it was a close fight, no problem. I'm going to come back down because there's a litter of guys down here that need my attention. Whether it's another Max Holloway, whether it's Yair Rodriguez, whether it's Arnold Allen, if he can turn things around. There are contenders that are coming at 145, and I think, to your point, this is the pinnacle of his career. For Yair Rodriguez, however, this is Mexico stand-up. Right? The Mexicans have been so successful in the last little while. And I think he's riding high with that Mexican pride, looking to come in. And if he beats Alexander Volkanovski, make no mistake about it, one of the biggest upsets of the year. and 100% an insane win to add to his resume.
Absolutely, I agree. Look at his back is against the wall coming in here, Seànie. But we've talked time and time again about, sometimes you need a little bit of madness to beat greatness and a little bit of unpredictability. And I think that's what has me most intrigued about this main event. And it's the unpredictability of Yair Rodriguez. It's the fact that, in fights we've seen him beaten until he goes and knocks out the likes of Korean Zombie at the very last second of a fight. So, that intrigue is going to keep us all interested on Saturday night, really, especially when you're coming in against a guy who's so technically masterful in Alexander Volkanovski.
100%. Like, we look at guys like Volkanovski, we look at guys like Demetrius Johnson back in the day, and John Jones especially, and sometimes we foolhardishly kind of say, it's going to take someone. Remember, everyone used to say Rumble Johnson might be the guy to knock out John Jones. It's going to take someone with a big punch or something like that. And I say it foolhardishly because, sometimes it is foolhardy, but a puncher's chance isn't really a great chance. We watch enough MMA to see that it happens sometimes. Look, we're looking at Lee Hammond the other day, and it happened. It happened in that, make no mistake about it. But, it doesn't happen that often. But Yair Rodriguez isn't that. His style is almost to be that. Now, it's funny because I think when we go and talk about the co-main event, I think there's a bit of that there too, but it's very different to building your style around kind of being a finisher than looking for the big finish because someone is so much better than you. And people build a career off of this. He has someone, now, not to say he's not a very good fighter, but people like Yoel Romero and others have done it throughout. Vitor Belfort had very good careers throughout it. And I think it brings a level of intrigue. I've described this fight a few times now as the best fighter in the UFC against the most exciting fighter in the UFC. And now you might disagree with that, but would you have either of them outside the top 3 in either of those lists? I don't think many people would. So I think that's brilliant. The one thing, and before maybe, as you said, Ian, before we got to the X's and O's of the fights, I think it's very interesting as well, and Harry kind of alluded to it there. Volkanovski is coming back down, and we have seen in the past, all the time, when people move weight classes from the very top of one division to the very top of the other division, it's an issue. It is absolutely an issue. Now, how much muscle did Volkanovski put on to get up to 155 to come back down? We might look at him and say, okay, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He can make 145, but he is hefty, as we call him here in Ireland. He's sizey, he's wider than he is long. And it's, that's the sort of frame that it's easy to put weight onto. But how easy is it to get weight off of that frame? Will that make the weight cut a little bit harder and tougher? And we've seen Volkanovski throughout the years has been brilliant over 5 rounds, won many fights over 5 rounds. But we've also seen Yair Rodriguez be very good and win very late in 5-round fights as well. Now, will that play a factor? And not just that, right? Because I feel like if I was to answer that question myself, I'd say probably not. I think he'd probably be okay, but maybe. But I think it's good to throw that out there. The kind of the jet lag from 155, for want of a better term, might be a bit of an issue. Because you had this chance to be the champ, the thing that everyone wants to be, the thing that'll take you to the next stratosphere in the best division of all. And now you're coming back down, fighting the guy who was you 3rd or 4th choice when you kind of went up. And could there be a bit of that? Could there be a bit of, and the answer to that is probably no for me as well, but I think it's all right to throw that question out there. I don't think this is a given at all for Volkanovski, even though he's a big price, and even though I think we all probably favor him to win this, I just think it's very intriguing.
Can I just add as well, just as an interesting point, this is really the first fight where Volkanovski's been the favorite. He was the guy in the 145-pound division as he was coming up that nobody really looked at fuck me, that's the guy. That's the fucking guy. We 100%. Talked about Arman Tsarukyan at 155. We've talked about Arnold Allen at 145. We talked about Movsarov Lawyer for a time at 145. And you're that's the... Okay, Seànie didn't. That's the fucking guy, right? That's the guy. He was never that. And then he came in, won the title, and then everyone's it was too close. Max won it. And you're okay. And then they do it again, still really close. We like Max, so he won it. And then the third fight, It was still like, yeah, it was really close, whatever. And then obviously he decimates him and he's like, okay, well, I guess Max is just old then. And you're like, okay. And then he goes away, wins another fight, and then comes up to Islam Makhachev, and they're like, he's never beaten Islam. He's too small. He's this, he's that. And he goes and he runs so close to him. Now he's coming back down. To Seànie's point, Yair Rodriguez was third or fourth in line, like. And now everyone's like, well, Yair's shite. Like, Volkanovski's best fighter in the fucking world. Like, he can't lay a glove on him. Like, what the fuck is... I wonder how that mentally changes you, because there's something about being an underdog which is kind of freeing, right? Nobody expects you to win. Nobody expects you to do well. You go up against Max Holloway in the conversation for the greatest featherweight of all time, in some people's estimation, and you go out and you have two really close fights and one fucking not close fight at all, and nobody's counting you in at all. Now you come back down with all the stardom that you've earned from that 155-pound bout. What happens now mentally?
Yeah.
All the pressure is on Alexander Volkanovski.
It's crazy that like a lot of that fandom came based off that loss against Islam as well, rather than paying maybe a little bit more closer attention to what he had been doing against the likes of the Holloways and on his way up to getting that title at 145. And I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying, Harry, and I definitely think that it may play a factor, but I think it also kind of irks into the greatness of Alexander Volkanovski and how he carries himself and how he kind of relishes challenges like this, because he's not coming in to win. We hear him talking about beating guys at their own game, and he kind of somewhat did that against Max Holloway, where he kind of put the pressure on Max Holloway like Holloway likes to do against his other opponents. And I feel, you know, he went in there and he grappled against Islam Makhachev, and a lot of people weren't expecting that. And I think that's what has me, like, it's easy to say this is going to be a walkover, this is going to be this is going to be that. And I have to hold my hand up and say that when I first thought about this fight, I was one of those people. But the more you look into it and the more you kind of study maybe a little bit of tape and kind of take everything that we've talked about already into perspective, you know, you can't have an off night against Yair Rodriguez. It's as simple as that. And if you have an off night, you're going to be punished. So you always have that pressure as a champion coming in. But I think Volkanovski, Sean, if you want to come in, I think Volkanovski's, like, how he handles that pressure, how he carries himself, plus how he'll create these new challenges and keep it fresh for himself. That's a very important thing when you're a champion and you're a great fighter, because if you're going in there doing the same thing over and over again, it gets stale. You take your eye off the ball, and next thing you're Israel Adesanya and you're losing to Alex Bahia, because that's what happened with Izzy that time. I think he kind of maybe took his eye off the ball a little bit, and you only can take it off a little bit and you'll get punished at the highest level in this sport.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that part. I just think Adesanya is massively overrated. But on Makhachev and on other parts, yeah, I do see it as a factor. But I think everything you said there is correct. But like, one question you posed there, and I'd like to pose the question again, right? I think it's probably everyone. You look at this fight, Volkanovski versus Yair, who's going to win? Volkanovski, right? But like, the question you need to pose is like, and you said there, walkover, right? Which I think a lot of people thought. I probably thought that as well, maybe briefly or whatever. How was he going to walk over him? Like how was he? Maybe, okay, is there a world where he could? Okay, I'm going to wrestle heavy in this fight, and I'm going to take him down for 5 rounds, and maybe that way, right? But do we all see that? I don't anyway. I know maybe we don't know, but I don't see a way that Volkanovski fights Yair Rodriguez and it's a complete walkover. Like, could I see him winning 5-0 on the feet? Absolutely, I could.
I could too.
In all of those rounds, especially early, I think Rodriguez would be very dangerous. So, like, it's you're always on a precipice. Like that fight, the fight that I know we all love, Mark Hunt versus JDS. It was on those fights where JDS was winning it all the time, but that left hook was there all the time. And in the end, look, it didn't come, and it came the other way with the wheel kick, and he knocked him out. But like, that's the sort of fight that it's never going to be easy against Yair Rodriguez. And that's why, you know, I mentioned the puncher's chance and all at the start. I just love this fight for that. Like, we can see like a finish could come here at any time for Rodriguez, and it's so dangerous. And that little bit of, oh, I'm the champion. Oh, you know, I'm just going to go and pick up my belt. we see in all sports when that bit of complacency creeps in. I hope it doesn't happen on Saturday before that, around 6 o'clock Irish time. When that complacency kicks in for any team in any sport, it's a bad news. Very bad news. And I don't think it will. I'll say it again. I don't think it will. Volkanovski comes across to me as a very intelligent guy. And the most important part here is respectful. Like, I think he'd be very respectful of Yair Rodriguez's ability. And I don't think he'd go in there and underprepare or underperform, more importantly, against a guy or for a guy like Yair Rodriguez.
I think that's the most important. Sorry, go on in.
100%. No, 100%. Like, you asked how Volkanovski could make it one-sided. Well, let's start talking about that. Let's start talking about the nooks and crannies of this fight. One fight that I look back on was Max Holloway and Yair Rodriguez, and I felt that Max Holloway kind of won the footwork battle for the majority of that fight, where he had Yair moving backwards quite a bit, because I think Yair is at his most dangerous, obviously moving forward when he's on the attack, and he has the ability to get off his kicks at range. And I feel, the controlling of the distance in this fight is going to be pivotal on who's going to get the most success in the exchanges. And I feel that Volkanovski is going to be more successful moving forward in this fight, with the wrestling, with the grappling in his back pocket, and kind of getting Yair Rodriguez past that black threshold, close to the cage, where he doesn't have the space to kind of land some of his kind of killer shots and his unpredictable shots as well. Harry, when you're kind of assessing both of these gentlemen, what are some of the main factors that you're looking at that might prove pivotal on Saturday night?
So I think the main thing that I see being a really interesting turning point, or an interesting battle for Alexander Volkanovski to try to get through, is that you don't go into a Yair Rodriguez fight and win without walking through the fire. We saw Max Holloway in the latter stages of their fight. He'd taken a lot of damage. He'd taken a lot of shots. He dealt a lot of damage. He dealt a lot of shots. But he chose to wrestle. Why? Did he choose to wrestle because he just felt that that was the most economical method in order for him to win the fight? Was it because that was part of the game plan, to do a bit of striking for a little while, tire him out a little bit, and then take him down, possibly? Or was it that he was coming to a point where he realized that he was just taking too much damage? And so, let me take the fight down and fight smartly and get a win here. It's probably a combination of all of those things. And so this is a Max Holloway who we are used to drowning people with volume, drowning people with footwork, and drowning people with his own toughness. We go and we look at the Brian Ortega fight. We look at the Josh Emmett fights for Yair Rodriguez. It's just brutality, right? Like, okay, the Brian Ortega one's a difficult one because, injuries and whatever. But if we go back and watch what was happening up until that point, those body kicks, those leg kicks, the dexterity of the shots, the angle of the shots, something that Seànie lords over rightly when we're talking about Wonderboy, is that he can use his legs as jabs. And this is something that I think is really interesting when it comes to this fight, is Yair Rodriguez has an ability and a dexterity and an arsenal, and more importantly, a confidence to throw shots from angles that are very, very, very hard to replicate. Because what are you going to do if you're Alexander Volkanovski? You can't bring a Thai boxer in, because that's not the style. A Taekwondo fighter, more often than not, you're going to bring them in and they're going to have very little grappling awareness. And so the MMA rounds are going to be very one-sided, right? You can't quite mimic a round with pure striking if you're preparing for Yair Rodriguez in an MMA fight, right? And so I think that what Alexander Volkanovski is going to do, or how he game plans for nullifying the fire as much as possible, is very, 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 very interesting to me. Because as you say, Max Holloway was able to deter Yair by splitting the gravity in the middle, by constantly moving forward in orthodox. And when Yair went southpaw, he won the outside foot battle. He made sure he punished the naked low kicks with shots. But the range of Alexander Volkanovski is totally different to Max Holloway. And so how does he broach the range without the wrestling? Because he obviously just can't shoot immediately, There are knees, there are up elbows, we've seen them. There are a ton of things that Yair Rodriguez has to dissuade somebody like Alexander Volkanovski.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting, Sean. If you would like to piggyback off what Harry said there, what are your kind of thoughts and maybe how the fight might look on Saturday night?
I'm honestly not too sure, because I think Harry makes a great point there. I think that distance battle will be very, very interesting in terms of the striking. Now, Volkanovski is funny because I mentioned his shape earlier on. Like, his shape is, a prop forward, but he fights very long. Like, he's long arms, and I think the way his body turns when he's jabbing and when he's throwing these long shots just elongates all of his shots, and they're really, really good. Plus, you have that power that when you hook, it hurts. And how do you stop people circling around the cage? You hook him on one side and you leg kick him on the other side, and he can do both of those very, very well while intelligently kind of walking into that space. If he can do that night, look, I think he can. It's going to be a really tough night for Yair Rodriguez. It's going to be really, really tough. But as Harry says, Yair needs to bring things for those two simple things, I think. Bring something for the right leg kick, let's say, and bring something for the left hook. And that kind of, it's not a leaping left hook, it's like a stretched left hook that he throws. Whatever it might be, if it's like a turning side kick to the body, if it's loads of checks, if it, like, just hopping over a leg kick, catching him, trying to take him down, something like, he needs something mad. He needs something crazy like that to beat the simplicity of Volkanovski. And that should almost be, and I know the camp is over now and everything, but that should nearly be the code for the camp. Use your madness to beat his simplicity, because that's what Volkanovski is. He's just in my opinion, the second best simple fighter we've ever seen, with Demetrius Johnson being the best. I don't think he does. I don't think anyone has ever done the basics as well as he does. But if you're fighting him, take away the basics. Do not make it a basics fight. Make it a madness fight. Pull guard, try to triangle and pull it. Do whatever you need to do to make that fight crazy. And I love people who circle well. It's why Anthony Pettis is the most annoying fighter ever, because he just does it so badly, even though he has the athleticism and everything. But Yair does it really well. But the footwork you need to, like let's say you're going to act like you're going right and then you go left. That's so hard to do for 5 rounds against the guy who can make you pay as well as Volkanovski. So that are as much or as well, I suppose. Yeah. But that's why I think add in a few of the gimmicks into it. But the thing about Volkanovski is, and Harry has kind of already alluded to this, but I remember the last time looking at the Makachev fight before and after, and it's a fight that Harry loves and I love, and now we all love it as well. But like, Volkanovski's ability is so high, and I've said this multiple times, that like, it's hard to understand it. Like, we don't know what he's doing when he does things, but he just does them and they work. Like, he's I don't want to talk about Adesanya again, but like, sometimes Adesanya feints to look pretty. I'm going to feint because I'm supposed to feint. I don't think Volkanovski's like that. I think his feints matter. He throws something right out. Like, Volkanovski is one of those fighters that if there's 5 shots that don't land, they're to set up a knockout blow. And it might be a knockout blow, but it's something that could be a knockout blow, or it's something to change the fight, something big that he goes from then. He's like he's like a snooker player in the middle of a 1-4-7. He's looking 5 or 6 shots ahead all the time. That's what Volkanovski is to me, and he's playing a different game to everyone else. But that different game is all well and good against the guy who's also trying to do basics, but you just know you're so much better. Is Yair Rodriguez going to play that game? He's not. Like, that's why it's intriguing for me, because it's it's one lad playing chess and one lad playing checkers. But what if the lad playing checkers picks up the board and fucking hits you over the head with it? He'll win.
100%. One thing, and I'll let you in just a second. One thing I'm curious about, and a very underrated thing with Volkanovski, is his gas tank. The man doesn't get tired. He even outworked Islam up a weight as well. And it's like, having the ability to be able to fend off his attacks, or maybe to counter his attacks in maybe rounds 1, rounds 2, how easy is it going to be in rounds 3 or rounds 4 or rounds 5? Or will we see Volkanovski play the kind of long game here as well, because if we were to look cheap and we were kind of start nitpicking at Yair's game, I mean, he's not as explosive in the 5th round, but he has had some gas tank problems in the past. And look, when you're facing a guy like Volkanovski, who may even come in here and look to try and attack the body and take away that gas tank as well, without your explosiveness, especially for a fighter like Yair, you're taking a big kind of aspect from his game that he uses and time again. You don't have that explosive power, but you're not going to be as dangerous as you are at the very start. So be interesting to see how, for me, Volkanovski handles Yair at the start of the fight. And I just love, I call it the arc of a fight. And I love watching Volkanovski's arc of a fight, because it's like Sean said, it's the little small things that take 2 or 3 or 4 times when you have to look at it to kind of figure out what the hell is going on. And that's the beautiful thing about Alex Volkanovski's game, in my opinion. Just to maybe piggyback, and I'll let you in with what you had to say first, Harry, but given that he's coming off a camp that was so grapple heavy against a guy like Islam Makhachev, do you think that might give Alex a little bit more confidence coming in here that he will have that in his back pocket? Now, if I had a gun to my head and was asking what Volkanovski is going to do more or what he's going to lean on more, I'd say he'll still try to lean on his striking here, because, you have that ego as a champion, and what greatness is beating people at their own game. And he's going to want to go out there and outstrike Yair Rodriguez. But I think it'll give Alex Volkanovski the confidence knowing that he has the takedown in his back pocket, while at the same time maybe making Yair a little bit apprehensive as well. Whereas that if you do throw a spin and an attack early and Volkanovski goes for maybe a body lock takedown, even if he just gets you down and let you back up, that's in the back of your mind, and it can kind of take away from your game a little bit as well. Just maybe your thoughts on that, please.
I just realized I was on mute. What a fucking idiot. So I think my point actually quite nicely wraps into the question that you were going to have, and that's the grapple heavy camp. I don't think, and maybe this is going to sound weird, but just go with me. I don't think it was a grapple heavy camp. Not in the sense that it was a camp where, and this is, I think, where Seànie's talking about, where he does stuff that we don't really know. It's because he's innovating, right? What we're seeing is he's pulling camps together, not to be like, okay, how do I beat Islam Makhachev necessarily? He's bringing camps together to say, how do we push MMA forward? Where are the gaps in MMA and how can we exploit them? It just so happened that the body shape was Islam Makhachev and the style was grappling, right? Because there's obviously a very specific style of grappling that Islam has, and a very specific grappling problem that Islam presents, right? Well, Yair Rodriguez is very similar. I think here, this is a very specific, very unique problem. And Alexander Volkanovski is at the point in his career, at least this is my perception, he's at the point in his career where he's not thinking about how do I beat Yair Rodriguez. He's thinking, how do I become the best MMA fighter possible? And because he is at the apex of the sport right now, what he will show us potentially on Saturday night is probably another leap forward in what we determine modern MMA to be, right? Because that's what I'm looking at him for. And I think to your point about having the takedown, doing the striking, whatever, I actually think Volkanovski doesn't even think like that anymore either. This is mixed martial arts now. And to the point about Demetrius Johnson, I don't really think DJ went in being like, I'm going to strike for round one, and if there's a takedown, I'll take it. I just think this is fighting, lads. I don't have individual sports anymore. I just go in and I fight, and whatever is available, whatever is there, I take it. If it's a jab, I take it. If it's footwork, I take it. Everything leads towards the end goal. The end goal is dominance. The end goal is a finish. The end goal is a win. Whatever route is available, I just take, because that's the level of expertise that we're dealing with here in Alexander Volkanovski. I think this is why the favorite is as heavy towards him as it is, because we're looking at a guy that has transcended what we thought mixed martial arts was, which is a culmination, a robot, a bolted together version of some arts. Alexander Volkanovski is modern MMA.
Absolutely. And we're going to see that firsthand on Saturday night. Really, really excited for that main event. 145-pound title will be unified, and we go on to the 125-pound division. Hashtag fly never die. Brandon Moreno comes in to take on Alexandre Pantoja, a guy who has beaten him 1.5 times in the past. And it kind of adds a little bit of intrigue into this one as well. Well, I'll go to you first, maybe, Seànie. It was like, I think the overarching thought I have on this is that if Alexandre Pantoja, and I feel he's probably not going to do this, but if he goes in thinking that he's going to be facing the Brandon Moreno that he faced in the past, he's going to be number one, massively surprised, and he's going to be number two, massively handled relatively easy as well by the champion. But I guess the dangling fruit that's hanging over this fight is the fact that Pantoja has gotten in there and he has got it done. He has improved somewhat as a fighter as well, although I feel the growth, the best growth of between the two fighters has come with Brandon Moreno heading into this championship fight. Your thoughts, please?
Yeah, 100%. Like we were talking briefly beforehand, and you kind of said that Pantoja has become maybe a cleaner fighter a little bit.
A little bit more polished, I said. A little bit more polished, yeah.
Yeah, but he was
still a bit
like,
Madison.
You know, he was already marble when they fought the first time. He was just, whereas Brandon Moreno was more like a dirty soccer ball or something, you know, that had been kicked around the road, and eventually it turned into a beautiful, like, World Cup final ball that was ready to be presented in front. You know, they couldn't have changed more, and it's Pantoja won't think, oh, I'm fighting the same guy. You know, maybe mentally, but 5 seconds before the fight or whatever it might be. Absolutely, but not in his preparation. Like, you couldn't be that stupid. Like, he's a completely and utterly different fighter. And the word polished is perfect for Brandon Moreno, because you go back and watch that first fight, and it is, to steal the old MMA term, it's like a baby anaconda who hasn't learned how to choke yet. You know, he wasn't the fighter he is today. He was just completely different. He was throwing things out there with no rhyme or reason. You know, we just talked about Volkanovski, the greatest fighter of all time. I'll throw it out there at throwing shots that mean something. And I think that's exactly what Moreno has become. You know, everything now means something. He doesn't expend as much energy, and he's more effective, which is exactly what you want to be in this sort of sport. And, funnily, actually, having watched a good bit of both of them now over the last week, they've become a little bit similar, I think, in terms of fighters. Like, Pantoja has, and apart from the last fight against Perez, where he just went out and he went a bit mad, he's always been a lad who kind of comes in there and he looks for that big shot, and he'll kind of take it when it comes. Sometimes that goes out the door and he kind of gets drawn into things. But what I think Moreno is right now is a guy who looks for the shot to present himself. You know, as Harry was saying there, we talk about the apex of MMA all the time. We kind of deal with what presents itself. And I think that's what Moreno has become, but with more moxie, I suppose, with more control. And he's really, really good at controlling a fight now and landing the shots that need to be landed. I think it's interesting. The one big thing I would look at here is kind of that fight in the pocket, because both of them get drawn in at times, and both of them can have a bit of a back and forth and land big shots. I just wonder what it looked like if and when that happens. I think there's a very interesting battle of, like, the general goings of the fight, let's say, where I think Moreno now will win that in terms of deciding where the fight is fought, while Pantoja will still be dangerous from there. But when it gets into, like, let's say Pantoja lands a big shot and then Moreno lands on back, and then, it's like a hockey fight, the gloves are off and they're just kind of going for it. How will that look? Because I actually think before, Pantoja was kind of winning that in the first fight, but this time I think that will have switched, and I think the ability to take damage is massively on the side of Brandon Moreno. And if it turns into that, as I said, at any time, I think Pantoja might struggle there. So for Moreno, like, it's an interesting one because he's become a more clean and polished fighter, Ian. But I think if it gets a bit dirty, it'll actually suit him. So I do. But it's
the durability there that you said between the two is that I feel if we do start throwing wild here, Harry, in the pocket, you'd have to fancy, Brandon Moreno is going to be able to absorb those punches better. I think, when you're in there, obviously, against somebody like Davison Figueiredo, and I'm sure Brandon Moreno will be glad to see the back of Davison after those fights, because you're in there with a high-level heavy hitter as well. Well, I think that Pantoja does carry some power, but he doesn't carry as much power as Davison, but he's not as technically sound as Davison either. I think, whether you agree with me or not, I'll kind of state Pantoja is more of a kind of an opportunistic fighter, whereas that he'll see gaps, he'll go for them, especially when we get to the grappling department. And Moreno was kind of like that too, but like Sean said, and like what I think as well, I think the biggest factor between the both fighters since they were last in there together is the fact that Brandon Moreno has really cleaned up that kind of in-between bits where there is no wasted movement anymore. There is no wasted shots. And I think it's the difference between turning yourself into a legit contender from a champion. And I think we've seen the fruits of that labor from Brandon Moreno in his most recent fights. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think what we've seen from both fighters actually is a maturation process. It feels as though Pantoja has realized who he is, which is just a bit of a Tasmanian devil, really. Goes in there, does loads of spins. If he grabs you back, you're going to do loads of spins, and then he's probably going to try and choke you. Brandon Moreno, I think, has realized that for him to be a champion, that style doesn't work. We've talked about Brandon Royval, right, previously, about his potential ascent to the top. That style where you go in and you're just a mad bastard, it just doesn't work at elite level MMA because guys are too good at managing rounds. They're too good at managing distance. They're too good at managing range. And they're too good at changing levels and changing transitional positions. And then you just can't find yourself in those areas. I think for me, you mentioned about the arc of fighting and you really like watching the arc of fighting, and Volkanovski's there as well. I think the arc of the fight, especially in those first 3 rounds, are very, very important for Brandon Moreno. Because if he can control them, if he can work the legs of Pantoja, if he can work the body of Pantoja, and if he can make sure that when the scrambles happen, he adheres to solid principles, I think this is his fight to lose. Because as you boys have already touched on, and I agree 100%, I think the footwork is more clean from Moreno. I think the shots come from cleaner angles. I think they come with cleaner intentions. And so I will always, always, always pick the more quote unquote technical fighter over the other because I think overarchingly technique is going to win overall. But I feel like Moreno needs to be very, very wary that Pantoja comes out. And if we look at all of the finishes, the last finish outside of the second round was 2017 for Alexandre Pantoja, and that was Neil Seery. Everything else is round 1 or round 2, or he wins a decision. But rounds 1 and rounds 2,
Neil Seery.
Shout out Neil Seery, legend. Rounds 1 and rounds 2 are dangerous. So Moreno needs to make sure he's on his P's and Q's, work behind the jab, work behind the leg kicks. There's going to be some mad bastardry. And I think Sean's right. If the pocket presents itself, sit down on some shots. Let's see what he's made of. Let's see what the chin's got. Because you know you're confident in your own chin if you're Brandon Moreno. You took some absolutely hellacious shots off Davison Figueiredo and did that thing where he points his fingers to the sky and shrugs his bottom lip and carries on fucking trucking. So I'm really, really excited for this fight because we're going to see, I think, the real true maturation process of both fighters. And I think we're going to see the ceiling of both fighters as well. And I just think that the ceiling of Brandon Moreno is a touch higher than Alexandre Pantoja.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Seànie, you like when you're watching back the last fight, obviously we've talked about the growth of Brandon Moreno as well, but they will have looked back to kind of see some of the flaws that Alexandre Pantoja was able to take advantage of. Is there anything that kind of stood out in that fight that you feel Moreno's team, I think getting drawn into the mad kind of scrambles and the mad exchanges, probably something that needs to improve from Moreno, but I think that that's naturally progressed with the levels that he's jumped in recent years too.
Yeah, if it's mad bastardry from second one, big problem for Moreno because he's gone back and he's literally regressed into what he was back in the day. So I 100%, that's nail on the head stuff there. Like if you see Moreno going out now, unless he thinks, well, I'm going to put it on this lad and he's gone out of here early, which I don't think that's the safest bet or the safest strategy. but I actually feel like it could work. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't advise it, but it could work if you want to.
Sometimes fighters make that decision, though, don't they, Sean? Like sometimes they're just like they're saying, right, I'm just in for a fight tonight, and we go back to the maybe wanting to beat fighters at their own game as well, where you want to meet fire with fire. Not the smartest thing to do, but we've witnessed it before in fights. Fighters do make it, and I guess from maybe a fan's perspective, that would make it a very entertaining fight for us. I guess we'd be on the edge of our seat, but you've got to think a little bit more smartly when you're in there. Like
my favorite fight of all time now is Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg. And that's the personification of that. It's like, fuck this. And both of them just throw everything at each other. And that's that. And like, I'd love to see that. Like, I think we'd all love to see that. Maybe not Harry round, rather a 5-round fencing match. But no. But yeah, look, it's interesting. Look, if you are Brandon Moreno, and this is really easy, because all you have to do if you're Brandon Moreno is look at your last couple of fights and look at that fight against Pantoja. And you can see it clear as day how different you are. Your word polished, Ian. It's just perfect. We must almost start calling him polished Moreno, because that's what he is. And if he was to regress from that, it'd be no good. But I also think, right, some fighters, I think Aaron Pico is a good example of this as well, right? A guy who just went all out at the very, I'm going to destroy everyone, and next thing, boom, you get knocked out, you get submitted, all of that. And then you draw it back, you draw the line, you start under a great coach, and you move and you become a very, very, very good fighter. Now, obviously, Pico hasn't reached the same place yet as Moreno has, but there's a spot you reach there, and I think Moreno's already reached this and already does this, but I think you have to add in a little bit back, right? You have to realize and Pico has done a little bit of this, but I think he needs to do a little bit more. You add in a bit of that, right? I'm confident in myself now. I know I have controlled the first 3 minutes of this round. I'm going to put it on him here for 90 seconds. We'll see what happens in the last half minute, and we'll go back and we can start again from round 2 or round 3, whatever it might be. And that would, to me, would be a smart plan from Brandon Moreno, because I think a big part of this as well is Pantoja will throw those shots inside, as Harry was talking about. Make him pay for those shots, right? And making him pay for those shots might lead to a bit of mad bastardry, as Harry calls it. But making him pay for them once, twice, 3 times will make him very, very, very wary to throw him the 4th, 5th, and 6th time. And if he doesn't throw that shot inside until he gets the finish or until he dominates the fight, he is in bad trouble. He's in bad, because there's always a chance the fight gets to the ground. That's one thing as well. Maybe we haven't talked about enough, and maybe he could. When you go back, you can talk about that. But what if the fight does go to the ground? Like Pantoja is very good on the ground, and maybe that's a part. Like, well, if I can't win this fight on the feet, maybe if I'm getting, if I have issues, maybe then. But one thing as well on Pantoja, watching his fights, he's very bad takedown defense. Like, he gets taken down himself, and maybe that's a ploy. Maybe he wants to have bad takedown defense. I don't know. Maybe he'd be able to speak on that better than me as jiu-jitsu experts. But that's another part of this fight, maybe that we'd want to, people going to Saturday night want to maybe think about.
Yeah, it's kind of like your percentage chances, and I'd say Pantoja definitely has a higher percentage to win if the fight was to hit the mat. But I also think that Moreno is going to be not wanting to go there. I think he'll have the ability. Look, and when I say percentage chances, I mean a higher percentage. Who do I feel the better grappler is overall? I think Moreno is very, very kind of well put together on the mat as well. But I mean, I feel that his striking has developed something savagely, where we're seeing a lot more of a technical side. Moreno, where he's throwing his kicks to the body against Kai Carter France and stuff like that. It shows the waves that he's been making on the feet. And I feel when you have a guy like Pantoja that does throw wild in the pocket, a little bit of technique in behind what you've got will go a long way. For me, I feel it with Brandon Moreno in this fight. Very, very excited to see. And just maybe to finish off, it's like, I think a similar enough trend between the co-main event and the main event is the champions going out there and taking away the confidence of both of the challengers. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly they can do it, or if they can do it at all. But we shall move on to the middleweight division, and that's Dricus du Plessis, who's coming in to take on Robert Whittaker in the middleweight division. And I mean, the simplistic way that I can kind of explain this is and it's super, super lazy. I'm going to hold my hand up here. Harry, I just don't fucking know how Dricus du Plessis is going to get this done, man. Because I don't think we've seen anything so far from him that makes us want to think that he has any chance coming in here against Robert Whittaker. And maybe you can shine a bit of light on some of his chances, but I'm curious to hear how you feel about this matchup.
I don't think I can shine any light. I think this is a murder waiting to happen. I really do. Dricus gets tired. He throws overreaching shots. He doesn't take his body behind his shots. He's got power. I give him that. He's got power. But, I mean, Bobby Knuckles' blitz style is just perfect for this type of fighter. Perfect because he's built an ability where he doesn't have a vast amount of range or height necessarily in that middleweight division. And so he utilizes that blitz style to get inside and land his shots. Now, when you're fighting somebody like Israel Adesanya, who can find a way to hold you up in that blitz and turn corners and drop you and find left hands from odd places, that's fine. But we know that Dricus du Plessis is not at the same level of just out and out striking as Israel Adesanya. I think that the aggression of du Plessis is actually going to play against him here. When you're Robert Whittaker, you almost have to counter the counter, right? Robert Whittaker wants to come in, he wants to blitz, and you have to be able to read that blitz and find the shot that splits that counter. You have to find the shot that splits that blitz. I just don't think Dricus is going to do that. Like, I think he's going to come in. I think he's going to walk forward. He's going to try and land his shots. And I just think Robert Whittaker's going to eat him alive. Like, whether it's that Robert chooses to take him down, whether that's Robert chooses to out footwork battle and catch him on angles, or whether he just chooses to meet him as he's coming in and blitz him. Look, obviously, if Dricus catches him with shots coming in, fine. This is MMA. These things happen. Bobby Knuckles has been knocked out before. But the level of technique to me is way off in this fight.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There's one word that springs to mind me here when I think about this fight, and it relates to Robert Whittaker, Sean, and that's patience. I think if he has enough patience, and he is a very patient fighter, and I think especially in this fight against someone like Dricus du Plessis, have patience just to hold off and going on the attack. I think we've seen it somewhat last weekend with John Strickland, where you notice that the fighter that you're facing is fading, and you just wait until the right moment to kind of pounce and go on the attack. Well, I feel that Dricus does have some level of power and can be a little bit dangerous. You never know what may happen at the start of a fight. I agree with pretty much everything that Harry has to say, and I believe if Robert Whittaker is patient coming in here and he lets Dricus throw these shots and defends those shots and lets Dricus kind of tire himself out, I think he's going to be like a kind of a tiger waiting in the long grass out in the Serengeti. He's going to pounce eventually, and he's going to put this to an end as quickly as anything. And I made an African reference there without even meaning to. And I just thought of a lion pouncing. But anyway, I should have took credit for that any which way. Your thoughts on that? Patience, I feel, is going to be big for Bobby Knuckles here.
I would tend to agree. I think Robert Whittaker and I
you hate Bobby Knuckles, and I was like, that's why I said it.
Oh no, I don't hate Bobby. No, I was going to say I hate Bobby Knuckles. I actually don't hate Bobby Knuckles. Which are the ones I hate? There's a few I hate. I hate Charlie Olives. Hate that with a passion. And Benny Daggers. That's what I'm sorry, Harry, because you said these, but I hate him. I hate them. Bobby Knuckles is at least funny. But anyway, one of the fights I use like all the time when talking about certain fights is Whittaker versus Romero, because like Whittaker's ability to stop Romero's game by breaking his rhythm was exemplary. Like it's almost the perfect fight, even though like he fucked up both his knees. Like it's the perfect fight that he won a fight he shouldn't have won, kind of thing, and he did it in the perfect, like it's the perfect game plan. And you're fighting a guy like Dricus du Plessis who has like he's just mad, like, and he wins these fights because he's madder than you. But like, better is better than madder. And if you can be better than the mad lad, you should beat him easily in this game. It's funny. I know we'll talk maybe a little bit about Bo Nickel later on, and we, like myself and Harry, talk about it all the time on Speaker's Corner. But like, do we believe in MMA at times? Like do we actually believe in MMA? Because sometimes we don't. Like, I thought there was some people talking about, put Jack Della Maddalena in there against Bo Nickel, or, you know, people were talking about, put Bo Nickel in there against Adesanya straight away, and think, no, maybe that's a bad example. But like, do we not think like a UFC champion can beat someone after 2 fights and things like that? And now the point I'm making here is like, the Du Plessis and Whittaker are not that, but Whittaker is like a firmly better fighter than Du Plessis. Now, as I said earlier, puncher's chance, there's always a way that can happen. But and Harry's explained that, and Ian, you talked about that as well. But I would make just one point to go against everything that has been said so far. Robert Whittaker is 30 fights into his career. He's, I just mentioned the injuries, the bad knee injuries. He's a lot of wear and tear on him, a lot of 5-round fights. There will be a point for Robert Whittaker where he will fall off a cliff, and he's only 32 years of age, but it will be before most people because of the amount he's been through. It happens all the time. We see it in all different sports. And he can't continue to fight his style if he's on like a completely bum knee. He just can't do it. He's an intelligent style, but his ability to use his body to do it is a massive part of that. Will this be the fight? I don't think it will be this fight, if I'm being honest, but maybe something to think about going forward. Like, I think what Dricus can do, right? And one thing he has, what's the word? What's my favorite word, Ian? You mentioned it there earlier on. Durability.
Yeah.
Dricus is very durable. Like, he's too durable. And he's another one we're probably looking at in 3 or 4 fights. I think, like, well, he's going to fall off a cliff as well. But if he can just be more durable, outlast Whittaker, wait for Whittaker's body to fall apart and win in the 3rd round or something like that. I'd love if this was 5 rounds as well. Now, I wouldn't be saying that at 5 o'clock on Saturday morning, but it's an interesting fight. And it's one where they're at a certain stage of their career now for both of them that maybe, and I don't think it will be, but maybe it could be that graph fight where one's on the way down and one's a little bit on the way up, and maybe it's just overtaken. But Whittaker is my pick, and I'm sticking by it, but just a little bit of interest there, maybe.
I definitely couldn't disagree with anything that you said there. It adds that small bit of intrigue, and it kind of feels like that's what the UFC have been trying to do with Robert Whittaker for the last little while. And maybe he has slightly fallen off a cliff, but maybe no one has come in to face him that has been good enough. Bar than Israel Adesanya, he's the only guy who has beaten him since 2014. That has been the only one who's taken advantage of that a little bit. But be interested to see if Dricus does it on Saturday night. Moving on to the lightweight division, Harry, Jalin Turner takes on Dan Hooker with his Ryan Gosling haircut coming into this fight. Bleach blonde, nice quiff on the forehead, but he's going to be doing well to keep that color blonde if Jalin Turner has anything to do with it. We seen Elvis Brenner last week come in with bleach blonde hair, and he left with bleach red hair coming after the fight. The same thing could happen here if Jalin Turner has his way in the lightweight division. About as excited I am to see Turner coming off that loss against Gamrot, that many argued he could have taken that, and that was a super, super close fight. But he proved against Mateusz Gamrot, Jalin Turner did, that he is the real deal. And he's been faced with a pretty winnable fight against a good name here that he can go out and maybe... I always try and look at it from the perspective of what the UFC want here. And the UFC want Jalin Turner to come out here against the name and get out and highlight real finish. And there's a very damn good chance of that happening, in my opinion, in this fight. How about you?
If Jalin Turner grapples, we're going to have a very short night, I think. We have seen a couple of times now, Dan Hooker is willing to throw the kitchen sink in a little bit quicker than everyone else is. And what I mean by that is we saw against Arnold Allen, he clipped Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen was like, do you want to maybe possibly have a fight in the pocket for the rest of this? And Dan Hooker's like, I've already set my tent up. We're fucking here and we're doing this and it's happening right now. And he sort of alluded to that in a strange way in the press conference yesterday or today, whatever it was. And he was saying about his tattoos and that they were completely impulse. And his original choice for his back tattoo was to have something small. And then the artist was like, oh, how about we do it a touch bigger? And he's like, yeah, sure, grand. And then half of his back is full. And his leg's the same. He went in wanting something small on his leg, and your man drew it the entire length of his shin. And he was like, fuck it, you might as well wrap it around both legs. And all of a sudden, half of his body's tattooed when he went in for 2 small pieces. And I sort of feel like, you know, one thing that we love about MMA is that the fighting style tells the man. That's Dan Hooker like. He's incredibly impulsive. And if you're Jalin Turner, with the length, with the range, with the intelligence with which he can fight at, and his ability to move through the transitional positions at will, you can pull Dan Hooker into whatever you want, really. You know, you just say to him, you just point at the middle, and Dan Hooker's like a Labrador. He's like, yeah, I'm there. No problem. Where's my treats? And all of a sudden, he's on his back getting Kimura'd. And so this, to me, for Jalin Turner, is an IQ test. This is what the UFC is doing. They're saying, okay, you slip up against Pantoja Gamrot, no problem. Absolutely fantastic fighter. Here is an IQ test that has a great name for you. There are ways in which you can win this fight, in a multitude of different ways. You can outstrike him, you can grapple, you can counter-strike, you can do all these different things. Let's see whether you have it in your back pocket to not get caught by somebody like Dan Hooker, who is absolutely a live dog in this.
Absolutely. We talked about ways that Jalin Turner can win, Sean. Is there any ways you feel he might go out and lose this fight? Not really.
Sometimes people fail IQ tests. Your boy Patrick Sheehan thinks Dan Hooker is going to win. He's picking him and he's betting on him and the whole lot, you know. So, do you know how I envisage just finishing? Do you know that the way Adesanya knocked out Whittaker? Do you remember it was kind of like that? Yeah, that one, those one. That's how he's going to knock him out. I feel like a left hand just going to absolutely rattle him. He's going to go down to his knees and fall backwards like that. That's how I think this. Like the lint, like Turner, I think it needs to like control this fight a little bit. But if Dan Hooker is coming swinging at you, just take a step back, let him get off balance and swing that fucking left hook inside and take his head off. Like that's, Jesus, it's, if you have the skill set of Jalin Turner and you're fighting someone with the skill set of Dan Hooker and you have the size and you have the reach, you almost have to do that. You almost have to plan to do that, because it's like, it's going to war with a lad without actually putting yourself in a lot of danger, because you know you can stay outside of that range. You know he will enter that range. You know he will overextend in that range, and he's leaving himself massively open for you to hit him now, unless Hooker fights differently. But yeah, that's how I see it. But Harry makes a good point as well. Like, take the fight to the ground, submit him, Kimura him, whatever it might be, you know. But I think like, if you're presented with Dan Hooker, right, and you're a lightweight in the top 15, that to me is, you've an opportunity there on one of the biggest cards of the year to show off. You know, Jesus,
that's exactly what this fight is set out for him to do, really. That's what I was kind of saying at the start. It's like, what do the UFC want here? Well, you have a good card placement against a well-known name. That's actually a winnable stylistic match for you. And I also agree with Harry. What he said is that, like, Hooker at this stage of his career does look for ways to kind of exit a fight if it's not going his way. And that's him that's him getting to this stage based off the fact where he's chosen to stay in some of his earlier fights where he probably should have chosen to get out. So his durability, you know, which you talk about quite a bit, is kind of fading a little bit as we see him getting in there. 155 obviously suits him a lot better than 145, but, you know, Dan Hooker was always a favorable fight for anyone who you want. I mean, if you're, with all due respect to Dan Hooker, you're getting matched up with Dan Hooker, it's to try and make your name off Dan Hooker, really, because he's an exciting fighter. He puts himself out there, and, you know, he can make you look good. He can make you look sometimes even better than you are. And I feel that that's what the UFC are trying to do here with Jalin Turner. John?
Agreed. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's talk Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel versus Val Woodburn. Valentine Woodburn coming in here at 7-0. Sean, you know, you've done a lot of research on Valentine Woodburn. Is he a guy that's going to kind of put the noose around Bo Nickel and cull his undefeated streak? Will he be the one to end all the hype? Will he be the one to shock us all coming in when we're talking about this early next week?
That sounded like a joke there when you said I've done research. I actually have done research.
I know. I kind of made it serious and then I turned the joke out of it, but that's what I did.
Well, no, when I say research, I watched his fights for 8 minutes earlier on. Probably not is probably the answer, but you never know. Like Bo Nickel, the point I was making earlier on about believing in MMA and all of that, right? Bo Nickel believes in MMA. You know, Bo Leave, he was obviously a great wrestler, but he's put MMA bits with that, and he's improving. He's only, 3 or 4 fights into his career, and let's see how he moves on. But we could talk more about Bo in a second. I'll talk about Val because it's funny, and this happens a lot. I was doing the PFL Europe preview this week, and with some of those lads, you know, they've never fought in anywhere near a big organization before. And there's this one lad, I can't remember what it was, it's in my preview anyway, and he had fought I think 7 or 8 fights, and all of them were in the same organization, and it was this small little cage, and every one of these fights turned into a grappling match. It's like you can't not have a grappling match in a fucking tiny little cage. But Val is a little bit the same. You know, I think they are Combat Night Pro, all of these fights in the same organization, a small little cage, and a lot of these fights turned into him being pushed against the cage, right? And they did that because he has ungodly power. He hits so hard, and he's actually really good at getting pushed against the cage for 4 minutes, breaking off and landing the big shot. And that's a very hard thing to be able to do, but also, like, it's almost great to have that in your arsenal for when you move to a big organization. And let's say you're fighting one of the best wrestlers in the world, you know? So if Bo wrestles him for 5 minutes, he can survive. Well, in the second round, he's a very good chance of actually hitting him really hard because he's been doing that for his last 7 or 8 fights. Look, will he get to the end of the first round is another big question. Will he even be able to get to the cage where he can break off it is another big question. Very, very tough. But what I would say about him after looking at him, he's good takedown defense against the cage. He hits very, very hard. But he's gone in there against Bo Nickel, and it's going to be a tough matchup for anyone at this level, let's be honest.
Kind of sounds like a similar stylistic matchup that they had with Tresean Gore as well. You know what I mean? And I think the UFC have probably done him favors, Harry, by getting him somewhat of a similar matchup here where, you know, you have a big hitter that might be able to test some of the chinks in your armor on the feet. And I guess the job here for Bo Nickel in this fight is trying to come into the pocket in a safe manner and trying to secure this takedown in a safe manner, because I don't know. I thought maybe against Tresean Gore, when you might have had a little bit of time to work on your camp on the stand-up, I think that we're definitely going to see Bo Nickel play it safe, and rightly so, against the guy who's just coming in on a week's notice here.
Yeah, I mean, based on Sean's description of your man, I'm going to use a phrase from the local London area, and that's it's peak, fam. It's gonna be peak for him, because look, if your game is I'm gonna get pushed up against the fence and then land big shots, big man, it's long for you. It's super long, because this is not
groups there all of a sudden. What's happening here?
I am. It's Bo Nickel's wrestling acumen and grappling acumen is just at the moment. I think he believes in MMA, and I think Sean is absolutely right, but it's not MMA, right? It's not. And so it's not stuff that you're prepared for. The way in which he's going to look for singles, transition to doubles, transition to high crotches, transition to ankle picks, even against the fence, is not going to be with the same transitional patterns that you're used to. And I think that is a big problem. I think, to your point, Ian, Bo Nickel should be playing it safe his entire career. Like, if you can go in, run across the cage, duck under a couple of strikes, land a takedown and submit your man, do that. Like, just do that forever. If that's what you do.
I agree what you're saying, but I don't think you get better as a fighter without taking somewhat level of risks when you're in there with certain challengers. Like, I mean, yeah, ultimately you want to play the smart game. I wouldn't say go in here and try and stand with this guy on a week's notice at all, because you don't have enough time to kind of study his movements or to work on counters against that. But then when you are talking about a guy that's so wrestle heavy like Bo Nickel, I mean, just go back to the trough. Whatever you're good at, you stay being good at. But I mean, I know me being selfish as a guy who's watching and not actually being in there. You know, that's what I want to see from fighters taking risks here and there. But I definitely understand what you're saying too, man.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Me as an analyst, one of the reasons I love Alexander Volkanovski, Islam Makhachev, is because both of them took risks. But if I'm in Bo Nickel's corner, I'm like, never throw a punch. Not even once. You don't need to. Just run across there, manage to get the takedown, and just submit your man. Like, Obviously, that's not going to happen. That's not the way MMA works. That's not how the real world is going to be. But in this fight specifically, it's just be super cautious until we can get to where we want to go. This is a potential banana skin. Let's not make it one. We're super, super early in our career. Let's ensure that the hype train continues to run. And I think all of us had a bit of a running joke in the group chat that we made a pick on Bo Nickel, the opponent changed, and everyone kept the same pick, right? So
we kept the same pick before the new opponent was even announced. It was very, very funny. One thing I've learned about Bo Nickel is that he's actually quite well to do when it comes to money side of things. He's made some smart investments in his life. He has a gym, and he doesn't necessarily need to kind of be coming in here and doing this MMA stuff, definitely for financial reasons anyway. It's more so for competitive, and I think we don't know whether that's going to be a help or a hindrance for him until he goes a little bit further onto his career. But it's definitely something. I thought I had the opinion that he just came straight from college and now that he's trying to make a living out of fighting, but apparently not. Apparently he's a very savvy businessman, but we'll see how savvy he is inside the cage on Saturday night. Seànie?
What did he invest in?
Bricks and mortar, baby. The only thing you have to invest in. That's it. Bricks and mortar. Yeah.
If that was Bitcoin, I'd say probably learn how to fight.
No, definitely not. He's more intelligent than that, I think. But how's the never? Robbie Lawler and Nico Price will fight in the prelim headline. We're going to blast through a couple of these prelim fights. There's a couple I'd actually want to talk about. First, we'll land on is Robbie Lawler and Nico Price. Harry, you spoke about mad bastardry earlier on, and I think this should be the title of this fight because, Robbie Lawler's quote-unquote retirement fight, I think, we're probably going to see somewhat level of mad bastardry from him, and the same at Nico Price. It's just a perfect tailor-made fight for a bit of craziness here in the welterweight division, isn't it?
Yeah, I just pray that Robbie comes in. I'm going to get there before Sean does. I'm looking forward to his next one. But I will say, I pray that Robbie Lawler comes in and believes that it's his last fight. Because if he does, he'll go in there and he'll dial the mad bastardry up to 10. Because if he doesn't, Nico Price is probably going to go in there and be more of a mad bastard. And he's going to put hands on Robbie Lawler and it's going to be sad. If Robbie Lawler, I really don't want to see Robbie Lawler lose this fight. I'll be completely honest and show my bias immediately. Robbie Lawler is a fighter we've known and loved for a long, long, long time. And I think I would love to see him go out with a win. But Nico is a person who is durable. He hits hard. He lands loads of shots. And he's mad enough that he's just really hard to fight against unless you're way better than him, because he proves just to be a nuisance in all of the positions that you're fighting him in. Like the Phil Rowe finish, like you just don't get the Randy Brown finish. You just don't get finishes like that randomly, You find him somehow in some weird upside down crucifix position. And you just start hammering him and he goes sleep. Like he's just one of those fighters. But I do expect bad bastardry from the very, very start. And you've said the prominent position in the prelims is not just because he's Robbie Lawler. I don't think the UFC really give a shit who he is, frankly. It's because this is a matchup between two guys who will absolutely go out there and throw the cereal boxes.
100%. Get those pay-per-view boys in. That's what the UFC are thinking with this fight. Seànie, if it is to be the last one from old Willie Lawler, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. I just can't call him different than Robbie, Bill, Willie, William. I don't know why I could have called him lots. Let's call him his proper name, Robbie Lawler. If this is his last one, obviously we have the Rory McDonald fight. Obviously he goes back way back. He's given us lots and lots of memories in his mixed martial arts career. A fantastic run as the welterweight champion in the UFC as well. He's really one of those legends, and I believe he's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame as well this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. It's just been a great career for Robbie Lawler, and it's the perfect matchup for him against Nico Price if it is to be his last one.
Oh God, I'm not sure about that. It has been a great career though, yeah. And
the perfect fight maybe to showcase his style of fight with he's coming in against another attack-minded wild fight maybe, but might not go too well for him.
I was just about to say there, like I think I'm looking forward to going back watching these fights and doing a career retrospective. But like I feel like a part of that career retrospective is, we'll say pre-GSP, post-GSP Robbie Lawler. Let's put it that way, because like post-GSP is where he came into his own as a championship level fighter. There was a lot of Matt Bastardry earlier in his career, and he was an unbelievable athlete, I think. But like the late Robbie Lawler resurgence was down to him. One, durability. No, durability is number two, but one, I actually think technique. Like, and tactics more than technique, actually, because he always had the technique. But like, him and Johnny Hendricks putting on, what felt like about 7 fights of hand fighting. And it felt like there was a hand fighting era there in the middle of it. And he was winning. He was really good at that. And his ability, and the one I was going to say about this fight and recent fights, the difference between the recent fights and the post GSP fights is he had the ability to control the hand fighting realm and then let his hands go, right? He's lost the ability to let his hands go. And that's why he's probably not going to win this fight. Like, if he can let his hands go, he can absolutely win this fight. But the older you get, we see it like, it's always Marlon Rice is the hardest one because he kind of can let his hands go, but then he gets, he's just kind of stuck there, and it's very tough. If you put the two of these lads together, put Robbie Lawler and Marlon Rice together, Robbie Lawler can still take a shot and all that. You'd still have a good, an old dog for the hill or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to looking back at his career, maybe ignoring the last few fights. This one, you just hope he gives himself a chance, but I don't want to see him take too much damage at the same time. But
yeah, I think we're all expecting or hoping that the MMA gods are kind of shining down on Robbie Lawler this Saturday night, because you don't get too many fairy tales when you're trying to exit mixed martial arts or in general in combat sports. Harry, Jack Della Maddalena has a new opponent. Unfortunately, here we're not going to get to talk about him versus Sean Brady, but Josiah Harrell comes in at 7-0 for a very tough task on his UFC debut.
He does indeed, lads. Fucking hell. He does indeed. Look, Josiah Harrell has been fighting for good promotions at his last 2 fights in CFFC and LFA. We know that they produce good fighters, but we also know that maybe this is me being a little bit snobby here, but if you go out and you win a title in either one of those, we can start talking about you as a guy that deserves a shot in the UFC. And we talked about Weston Wilson last week, and he fought Joanderson Brito. He had a title in an LFA or a CFCC, I can't remember which, and he goes in and gets absolutely fucking demolished by Brito, right? So that title isn't necessarily a yardstick, but coming in against Della Maddalena is in a really interesting spot in his career, where the last couple of fights, his first couple of fights in the UFC, there was just a couple of mistakes, some weird positions that he maybe shouldn't have found himself in, that he did find himself in, and we saw him work them through in real time. And now it felt like the Sean Brady fight was a fight where we were going to see him really start to come into himself. And this was the proving ground, right? If you go out and beat Sean Brady, we all know how good Sean Brady is. We're not doing that. And some fella's coming in on a week's notice and he's probably going to get whacked. But look, this is MMA. What are you going to do?
Well, I'm glad that we still get to see him fight anyway, Seànie. Yeah, I'm sure you are as well. And look at, we can't always have nice things, and look, there's still some time to go, but, this card is somewhat stuck together. It was unfortunate that this was like, Brady and Maddalena was the one between 2 legitimate prospects in the welterweight division, and it was going to basically tell us who was going to get the next push. Unfortunately for Brady, he got that staph infection in his elbow. Della Maddalena stepped up, offered to fight some guys, but you would expect he's going to go out there and get a win. But I think what we can expect after is for him to get that push up the welterweight rankings after this fight. You would think this is going to be a very routine win for him, and it'll be exciting to see what the UFC have for him next.
Yeah, he's a very good prospect. Like, there are so many very good prospects at welterweight, though. I feel like we could see like a Jack Della Maddalena versus a Michael Morales coming up or something like that. Ian Gary kind of bypassed the two of them and is now, a level above that. But we thought maybe he would have to, a lot of people were calling for Gary versus Morales at one stage. But yeah, I could see something like that happening. But yeah, like, it's still good to have him on the card. Like, there's a few, like, it's good to see Cameron Saaimon on this card as well. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's good. And like the rematch between Jimmy Crude and Lonzo Minifield, I think is a pretty interesting fight to have on the undercard as well. Like, I feel like that one, I don't know about you, but I feel like I went back and I watched it for the sake of the betting show, and now this show obviously as well, which is handy. But like, Minifield, almost knocked him out a few times. And like, if he could just like knock him out this time, I think he can win. It's easier said than done, I suppose, to do that. But I think that's a potential banger, because Crute doesn't have the best chin in the world. Minifield hits hard. Crute will take you down. Minifield doesn't have the best takedown defense. So yeah, but other than that, not great.
Ian, you're on mute.
Sorry, I know you were going to give out about not mentioning Tatsuro Tiara, who's also on that card against Edgar Chavez. You stop that now, Seànie. You stop that now. This guy is fucking good. If you've not paid attention already, you'll watch this guy on Saturday night. Cannot wait to see him in there. So glad that he's got rematched again. He was supposed to be fighting on a fight night card. Glad he's getting the shine on the pay-per-view undercard. This guy, Tiara, Seànie, is real.
I know. I did that.
And I'm glad you mentioned Cameron Saaimon as well, who I was very impressed with. Harry, I'm going to let you take the floor. Look at let me break down the rest of the fights. I'm going to leave it over to you to talk about Tiara and Saaimon. On the undercard as well, 115 women's division, Yasmin Yaragway against Denise Gomez in the strawweight division. We've got Victor Petrino versus Marcin Parashino in the 205 division. Cameron Saaimon, who we'll talk about. Shannon Ross against Jesus Aguilar, and Camilla Kirk versus Esteban Ribovic in the kind of opening fight of the prelims. But we will finish on Tatsuro Tiara and Cameron Saaimon. Two guys, Tiara in the 125-pound division, even though this is a catchweight fight at 130. Saaimon in the 135-pound division. Both super, super prospects. And I mean, if there's any reason why you should be tuning in early to these fights, it's for these two gentlemen, these two undefeated prospects that we're going to see on the undercard. Harry, I'm sure you're just as excited as I am.
I'd watch Tatsuro Tiara fight a fucking bin bag. Get it in there as many times as you want. Like the ceiling that this fella has at 21 or 22 years of age, I can't remember what he is just dramatic. We see him. We talk about Alexander Volkanovski being the apex of MMA, and he is, without a shadow of a doubt. Tatsuro Tiara is the guy that's watched Alexander Volkanovski come up, right? He's the guy that's watched him and been like, oh shit, it actually all just fits together, lads. I don't have to do the one and then I stop and then I do the other and I do this. And it doesn't. The way he transitions through positions, specifically on the ground, oscillating between damage, position, and submission threat, is just unbelievable. Now, he's still early in his career, and there's absolutely things he needs to learn. He takes a few too many shots in the first minute and a half of his fights. He takes a little bit of time to warm up. He's still growing into the range of his physique. He's still growing into the range of his body. All of that is fine. I'm here for it, because that boy can fucking fight. And the same for Cameron Saaimon. I think we can say literally exactly the same. The new breed, the pure breed of MMA, what we think is going to be, or at least I think is going to be the pure breed of MMA, takes a few too many shots sometimes, had a little bit of a tough early start against Mana Martinez, manages to turn himself around, find his adjustments, go out and win the fight, no problem. This is again a guy who's got some things to learn very early in his career, 22 years of age, no problem.
If we were kind of maybe to compare Harry, Tiara, and Saaimon, I think Saaimon at his stage of his career is still a little bit rough around the edges. I mean, Tiara obviously is making mistakes as well, but I mean, at 8-0 and you're in the UFC, you know, you're putting yourself in prime position to make mistakes. But you know what? He's made those mistakes, has Saaimon, and he's recovered from those mistakes, and he's gone on to win fights as well. So very promising signs from him as well. Very excited. Continue. Sorry.
I'm with you. I was literally about to make that point, that I think Tatsuro Tiara right now is I'm going to steal your phrase, is just a bit more polished, right? There's just a bit more polish on him. There's a little bit more shine just in his footwork, the way he handles himself, the way he sees positions. It feels like, you know, when you watch a good grappler, for instance, and they just flow through their positions. You go and watch Marcelo Garcia compete, right? You'll just watch him transition through his positions as Seànie polishes his microphone. You'll see him meld through positions and he doesn't think about them. He just takes them, right? He just takes what's available. Tiara does similar, especially when he's passing guard and he's looking to pin positions and look for submission threats and damage. It just feels natural. I would like to see Cameron Saaimon grow into that. And there are all of the embers of a very, very large fire that are about to be stoked in his career. And so I'm very, very high on both of them. But Tiara, for his age and for his experience of pro fights, it's just a touch further ahead. And I don't think that his opponent this weekend is going to offer him too much. And we've talked before on the balance breakdown. If he goes through this guy as we expect him to, I need a big name. I need a bigger test, a way bigger test next time.
Indeed. And that will wrap us up for hashtag another one, as DJ Khaled would say. UFC 290 this Saturday night. We've had some tremendous fun breaking down this card. Thanks, Harry. Thanks, Sean, for joining me and helping me get through it. I mean, it was an easy one to get through. It's a fantastic card. Lots of talking points, lots of prospects, double title shots at the top of the card. What more could you ask for? Really excited. Harry and I will be back to discuss all the fights on Tuesday on the balance breakdown. Seànie and Graham will share their thoughts on the big podcast themselves on Sunday. And until then, we will catch you. Follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell. Follow Sean Sheehan at Sean Sheehan Ba, and myself, O'Neill MMA, on social media. We'll see you the next time. Enjoy the fights.